Over recent cycles, disparate whispers of a growing unease have begun to find their way from the denizens of Hive City and the upper echelons of the Spire to the lowly underhive gangs tasked with safeguarding the various territories and holdings of the great clan houses. These unsubstantiated rumours and murmured tales have stirred up tensions and emboldened those seeking to profit from uncertainty. With raids and running battles breaking out at an ever-increasing rate, many gangs have taken the opportunity to settle scores or finally deal with long-held grudges. In such an environment, many territories considered vital to the needs of the clan houses have come under threat, forcing those trusted with their protection to prepare to counter any unwanted advances from those willing to risk upsetting the delicate balance of power that exists within the underhive. Fresh from another successful job, Jax Grendel and the Hounds have spent the last half-dozen cycles doing the rounds of the local Sump River crossings that sit under the control of House Orlock, checking the toll records and ensuring that everyone was paying their way, be it willingly or via the persuasive presence of Jackson Crow and his trusty shotgun. Their latest stop had them inspecting a small market area and nearby store of cargo containers, all the while keeping an eye out for any trouble following reports of potential clashes between local ESCHER and Goliath gangs taking place on the far side of the river. While kicking the crap out of random Goliath brutes was probably one of Lily's top 5 most enjoyable pastimes, her disappointment at the Poisoned Lillies missing out on the ongoing clashes with the scum-sucking meatheads was easily overcome by the rush of anticipation as her gang worked their way towards the Sump River crossing. The acidic stench of the toxic sludge was hard to ignore, but as Lily watched Foxglove direct the rest of the ESCHER into position near the toll bridge, she couldn't help but smile as the distant figures of the Orlock gang moved amongst the small market stalls on the opposite side of the river, looking for all the world completely unaware and utterly unprepared for the coming fight. The objective of this scenario is to end the battle in control of the Sump River crossing, by either wiping out the opponents, causing them to flee, or by being the only gang with a fighter within 12 inches of the centre of the bridge after the end of the third turn. Each gang can field up to 10 fighters, which are set up using the standard rules for deployment in Necromunda. The river itself is classed as deadly terrain, meaning any fighter who falls into it is instantly counted as going out of action. Additionally, during the end phase of the third turn, and during each subsequent end phase, there is a chance that the bridge will rotate 90 degrees in either direction. The gang winning this scenario will earn themselves D3 reputation and 3d6 times 10 credits, while the losing crew will only gain a single point of reputation. Lastly, any fighter who manages to successfully cross the river will earn themselves an additional D3 experience points. The Sump River is 12 inches across and spans the entire width of the map, with only a single bridge crossing its length at the centre. The two gangs deploy on opposite sides of the map, with all fighters having to be at least 12 inches from the halfway mark, though any fighters with the infiltrate skill may use it to set up anywhere on their gang's side of the river. In addition to the scenario rewards, there are 4 loot caskets located at various points across the map. Any fighter within 1 inch of a casket may attempt to loot it and, if successful, may earn their gang additional credits or an unwanted surprise. Caught off guard by the unexpected arrival of the ESCHER, the Hounds find themselves spread evenly across their deployment zone, with only a handful in a position to offer any real resistance at the start of the fight. By contrast, the Poisoned Lillies have worked their way into positions where they can quickly advance on the bridge, all the while being covered by Holly and Mistletoe's lasguns, and the deadly fire available from Foxglove and her plasma gun. Responding to the shouts of alarm at the sudden appearance of the ESCHER, Laszlo swings his heavy stubber up and aims it towards one of the gangers now standing atop the raised structure of the transitway. Pulling the trigger, he sends a burst of rounds zipping through the air and crashing into his target, the heavy slugs blowing through her armour and causing serious damage as she crumples to the walkway. Following Lily's orders, Spindle dashes forward, leaping the gap and crossing the platform towards the loot casket located at the end of the raised walkway that jutted out over the toxic sludge of the river. Hastily shoving his data slate into the bag at his hip, Hammerstein draws his auto pistols and sprints from the cargo container he'd been checking, up the nearby stairs and into cover, his eyes scanning the far side of the river for the oncoming ESCHER. With Spindle moving towards the loot casket, Ivy starts heading for the bridge, preparing herself to make a break for the crossing as a sense of pride wells up within her at being asked to lead the charge. Like Hammerstein, Crow pockets his checklist and dashes towards the stairs, unslinging his trusty shotgun and muttering a string of curses as he hears the distinct chatter of Laszlo's heavy stubber opening up. plasma gun in hand, Foxglove repositions herself behind a set of rusting barrels and aims the thrumming weapon at one of the Orlocks making his way towards the bridge. While usually known for her accuracy, this time her shot flies wide, and she snarls in anger as the bolt chews a hole in the metal plate instead of her target. As Laszlo's heavy stubber chatters away above him, O'Donnell pulls his guns and rushes along the walkway, heading for the battered barricade atop a nearby platform, his gaze darting between the approaching ESCHER and the loot casket he'd been tasked with retrieving. After pausing a moment to check her ornate rifle, Narcissus moves swiftly towards the edge of the river, sliding into cover and taking note of the various Orlocks scrambling to get into position to contest their advance. Shotgun drawn, Lander sprints forwards, reaching the stairs up to the central market and climbing them as fast as possible, getting himself into a position to cover the bridge and hold the line against the onrushing ESCHER. With blood running freely from multiple bullet wounds, Holly drags herself away from the front of the walkway, desperate to get out of sight of the heavy stubber and somewhere she can try to patch herself up. Turning away from the market infantry he was about to review, Coulson grabs up his autogun and moves towards the top of the stairs, taking aim at an ESCHER ganger in heavy cover and firing, though his rounds end up missing their target and instead ring harmlessly off the rusted metal of a nearby barricade. Given the choice between taking a pot shot at one of the Orlocks or helping her fellow sister, Mistletoe runs across the top of the walkway and into place next to Holly, pulling out bandages and getting ready to work on her wounds. Satisfied with how his gang were reacting to the approaching threat, Grendel sprints to the stairs and begins to make his way down to the level below, determined to close the distance to the ESCHER and send them back to whatever rat-infested hellhole they'd crawled out of. Understanding the importance of leading from the front, Lily rushes forwards, sliding into position behind a group of battered barrels and shouting out encouragement to the rest of her gang. Seeing what he assumed to be the ESCHER leader running onto the bridge, her power sword raised in challenge, Dylan shoulders his autogun and, with a deep breath, takes a moment to aim before pulling the trigger. Unfortunately, his shots miss, the rounds flying high and wide of the mark. Following Lily's lead, Nightshade spins from cover and, moving with unnerving grace, races towards the bridge, her silky smooth motion seeming particularly at odds with a sense of impending death radiating from her with every step. With both sides taking the opportunity to advance towards the bridge, most of the gunfire exchange has had little impact on either gang, with the exception being Laszlo's heavy stubber, which has left Holly with a serious injury and in need of medical attention, all of which means that neither band has any intention of backing down from the fight, which is only just getting started. Despite the vicious wounds inflicted by the heavy slugs, Holly, with the help of Mistletoe, is able to successfully staunch the bleeding, and with enough bandages and stims, manages to get herself back into the fight. Scanning the battlefield, Laszlo zeroes in on the distant figure of a plasma-wielding ESCHER and lines up his heavy stubber, taking a second to aim before unleashing a chattering torrent of high-caliber rounds towards his target. But despite his best efforts, the heavy-gauge projectiles fail to land, cratering the surrounding cover but leaving the ESCHER unscathed. With the sound of the Orlock's heavy weapon ringing through the air, Ivy takes a deep breath and sprints from cover, dashing onto the bridge and into place behind a battered-looking barricade, her adrenaline spiking at the thought of closing in on the enemy. Taken slightly aback by the aggressive nature of the ESCHER's advance, Crow steps up to the edge of the toxic river, his trusty shotgun settling snugly against his shoulder as he aims it towards the deadly-looking ganger on the bridge above. Firing off a salvo of solid slugs, he watches a number slam into his target, knocking the ESCHER off balance with at least one cutting through her armour in a spray of blood. Staggering, the ganger stumbles up against the railing and then, to Crow's delight, tumbles over them, falling into the toxic sludge beneath, her form quickly being consumed by the deadly acidic slurry. Crying out in anger at seeing Nightshade vanish over the side of the bridge, Lily rushes over to the edge and quickly spots the Orlock responsible. Gritting her teeth, she levels her plasma gun at the scum and fires, the bolt of searing energy hitting the ganger, but only with a glancing blow that sends him crashing to the deck. Deciding that the Escher Jew rushing across the bridge had gotten close enough, Lander chambers a shredder round and fires a spray of hot lead in her direction. A handful of shot catches the young ganger, though the barricade she ducks behind manages to deflect the majority of the impacts, leaving her prone but generally unscathed. Spotting the leader of the Orlocks making his way towards the bridge, Narcissus aims her needle rifle at the bulky ganger and fires, the silent darts zipping through the air but failing to find their target. Seeing his chance to take out the Juve who'd almost made it across the bridge, Hammerstein runs forwards, his twin auto pistols raised and pointing towards the prone figure ahead of him. Letting loose with both guns, he grins as the hail of bullets rip into the Escher, causing her to cry out in pain from the numerous impacts, which leave her face down and bleeding out. With Nightshade gone and Ivy down, Foxglove readies her plasma gun and moves into a better position to offer support. Raising the weapon, she scans the far side of the bridge, her gaze settling on the form of the Orlock leader, and, despite the unsettling feeling that suddenly runs down her spine, she fires at the brute, a series of plasma bolts lancing out and striking the Orlock cleanly, with at least one punching through his armour and sending him crashing from his feet, acrid smoke rising from the impact points on his chest. Watching Grendel go down under the barrage of plasma fire, Dylan takes aim and lines up on one of the Escher gangers taking potshots at the boss, his autogun kicking in his grip as he fires off a short burst that hits, but to his annoyance, the rounds only seem to wing the ganger, spinning her from her feet but failing to cause any real injuries. Having helped Holly, Mistletoe takes a second to try opening the loot casket at her feet, but the latch stubbornly refuses to give, and in frustration she delivers a swift kick before turning her attention back to the Orlocks. Levelling her lasgun, she takes a snapshot at one of the gangers in cover, her frustration increasing further as the energy beam slams uselessly into the thick metal of the barricade in front of her target. With the situation on the bridge seemingly under control, Coulson spots the young Escher trying to make her way towards the loot casket to his right, and taking aim, he fires off a burst of rounds in her direction. Most of the shots miss their mark, but at least one hits home, and Coulson watches in grim satisfaction as the Juve collapses to the deck, the bullet punching through her flesh to leave her bleeding in a crumpled heap. Grunting in pain, Holly pushes herself back to her feet and with a quiet word of thanks to Mistletoe, sprints across the gangway towards the barricade on the opposite corner. Ignoring the escalating firefight kicking off over the bridge, O'Donnell checks himself before sprinting along the raised walkway and out over the toxic sludge, heading towards the loot casket Laszlo had tasked him with securing. Groaning from the wound puncturing her abdomen, Spindle struggles to pull herself along the walkway, desperate to make her way to the loot casket and not let Lily or any of her other sisters down. Clambering back to his feet on the stairs, Grendel winces at the burns marking his chest and stumbles down the final few steps and over to the cover offered by a rusting and dented barricade, the stink of singed flesh filling his nostrils with every breath. Despite the Poisoned Lillies' best efforts, the Iron Hounds continue to operate at full strength, with none of their fighters out of action or suffering serious injuries. By contrast, Nightshade's misfortune and the wound suffered by both Ivy and Spindle means that the Escher are starting to feel the strain, though importantly, it's not enough to cause them to throw in the towel just yet. Without the support of other members of the Poisoned Lillies, neither Ivy or Spindle are able to do much to staunch their wounds, meaning both remain seriously injured and continue to bleed out. The corner of Lily's lip twitches slightly as the Orlock leader stumbles into sight. Aiming her plasma pistol towards him, their gazes meet, and for just a moment she hesitates, a feeling of sudden unease washing over her. The sensation is just enough to unsettle her aim, and her shot whips past the Orlock, blasting a smouldering hole in the market stall behind him. Pushing himself away from the river's edge, Crow gets back to his feet, levelling his shotgun at the Escher who'd fired at him, and letting rip with a full salvo. Unfortunately, his rushed shots crash off the intervening cover, and to make matters worse, he hears the telltale crunch of a misaligned shell jamming into place. Pissed off that the Orlock leader had seemingly shrugged off her last attack, Foxglove once again takes aim at the man, and yet again has to fight off the unnerving sensation as she meets his granite-like stare. Shaking the feeling away, she forces herself to refocus and fires, the plasma flying straight and true, taking the Orlock cleanly in the chest and this time managing to burn through his armour, his bulky frame collapsing and eventually falling still. Anger flares within Hammerstein at the sight of old Iron Eyes being blasted from his feet, and he rushes towards the prone ESCHER Juve ahead of him, reaching the injured fighter and jamming the muzzle of his pistol into her back before pulling the trigger, her body jerking violently with every round until his weapon clicks empty. Satisfied, he steps away and back into cover, not wanting to leave himself exposed as he quickly sets about reloading his weapon. Letting out a sigh of relief at a near miss, Narcissus climbs back to her feet and instantly spots the Orlock rushing along the nearby walkway. Shouldering her rifle, she fires at the approaching target, landing a solid hit that causes a toxin-induced seizure as a series of slender needles sink deeply into his flesh. After a moment, the thrashing stops, and Narcissus turns her attention back to the rest of the fight, and away from the Orlock's now motionless body. Watching the ESCHER turn away from O'Donnell's unmoving form, Laszlo grits his teeth and allows the barrel of his heavy stubber to drift towards the ganger, instinct guiding his aim as he pulls the trigger and fires off a long, sustained burst, not letting up until he hears the thud click-click-click of his weapon running dry. To his satisfaction, he scores a number of hits, the rounds chewing into the ESCHER, who reels from the impacts, wounds sprouting across her torso as armour fails and flesh splits until eventually she falls limply to the floor, like a puppet with its strings cut, her body now inert and lifeless. Desperately ignoring the carnage unfolding below her, Holly shifts into cover and raises her lasgun towards the Orlocks on the opposite side of the river. Lining up on one of the gangers, she fires, the lasbolt zipping through the air and striking the man in the chest, burning through armour and flesh alike and sending him stumbling to the floor with what she hoped was a serious wound. With only the ESCHER leader still pushing forwards, Lander sprints from cover and joins Hammerstein on the bridge in an effort to shore up their hold on the crossing. Free of incoming fire, Mistletoe takes the opportunity to yet again try and open the loot casket, but just like last time, it remains stubbornly locked. Her frustration boiling over, she resorts to slamming the latch with the butt of her rifle, and to her relief, the lid pops open and she quickly scoops up the handful of creds and data sticks within. As Coulson takes a las round to the chest, Dylan ducks his head and rushes over to his fallen gangmate, sliding up next to him and reaching for the stims and slap patches he generally carries for moments just like this. With agony lancing through her, Spindle continues to drag herself towards her goal, her only focus on getting to the loot casket and not letting Lily down. With both sets of fighters taking serious hits from the recent exchanges, each feels the pressure of the situation ratcheting up, but the presence of Armed Master Crow holds the Orlocks firm, and despite half their gang either down or out of the fight, the Poisoned Lillies are also able to shrug off the encroaching panic. Aided by Dylan and his various stims and patches, Coulson is able to block out the pain of his injuries and ready himself to continue the fight. By contrast, alone and wounded, Spindle can do nothing but continue to bleed out, leaving a slick crimson trail marking her slow advance. Deciding it was time to shut down the ESCHER's advance, Lander moves into a position to take a clean shot at the enemy leader. Raising his shotgun and letting loose another burst of shredder rounds, the blasted projectiles peppering the ESCHER and folding her over, knocking her from her feet with a snarl of pain and indignation. Rushing to Lily's aid, Foxglove snaps her aim towards the Orlock ganger now standing over the leader's prone form. The plasma bolt bursting from her weapon crosses the short distance in the blink of an eye and slams into her target, the superheated energy washing over the man's armour before burning through, causing the ganger to cry out in agony as he collapses to the ground. Sprinting up the stairs, Crow tries desperately to clear his jammed weapon, but the offending shell refuses to budge, and as he slams into cover, he begins muttering a string of profanities as he continues to work on the weapon. Having put down one Orlock, Holly turns her attention to the next, sighting along her rifle at the form of the ganger taking cover on the bridge. Letting out a slow breath, she squeezes the trigger of her lasgun, firing off a bolt that clips the man in the shoulder, and in response, the Orlock drops out of sight, leaving Holly unsure if he was out of the fight. Slamming a fresh magazine into place, Laszlo switches his focus back to the ESCHERs dug in atop the distant platform, firing off a burst in their direction, but failing to land any hits on the heavily obscured foe. Ignoring the pain from the numerous wounds that now peppered her body, Lily springs back to her feet and levels her plasma pistol at the prone form of the Orlock who'd had the gall to try and take her out. With a sneer of disgust, she pumps the ball of plasma into the man before her, not even bothering to watch as the shot shreds its way into the ganger, his body convulsing violently before growing still. Giving Coulson a final check, Dylan gets back to his feet and lines up a shot at a distant ESCHER who'd put a round into his friend. Unfortunately, the distance and cover make it a difficult shot, and despite aiming, he's unable to land a hit. Getting into a better position, Mistletoe takes a pot shot at the Orlock currently firing in their direction, but only manages to burn a hole in one of the various barrels he was using as cover. Checking the freshly burnt hole in his jacket, Hammerstein scrambles to his feet and retreats to the edge of the bridge, putting some distance between himself and the two ESCHERs still trying to advance on their position. Though weak and barely conscious, Spindle finally manages to pull herself over to the loot casket, a smile creeping across her blood-stained lips as she collapses atop the unyielding metal surface of her goal. Standing up with a wince of pain, Coulson takes a moment to assess the situation before setting off down the stairs, determined to play his part in holding the crossing. With only Lander exiting the battle thanks to the combined efforts of Lily and Foxglove, both gangs continue to deal with the building pressure of the increasingly desperate engagement. Despite this, the Iron Hounds resolutely refuse to consider giving up, and the Poisoned Lillies remain steadfastly determined to push on with their advance. Having reached her goal, Spindle lets out a long sigh as her last reserves of stubborn resistance fade away, her body finally yielding to the inevitable as her limbs grow limp and her stare becomes glassy and unfocused. As both gangs prepare for a final push, a deep mechanical grinding rises from the base of the bridge. After a moment, the entire structure rumbles and begins to turn as ancient mechanisms spring to life beneath the churning surface of the river. When the movement finally comes to an end with a resounding crunch, the bridge has turned a full 90 degrees, leaving Lily cut off and Hammerstein on his back, having fallen from the bridge as it started its rotation. Steadying herself, Lily cries out in rage at the unfolding situation. Struggling to regain her composure, she comes to a decision and, taking 2 steps back, sprints towards the edge of the bridge, leaping from the railing and clearing the distance to the other side of the river with ease, landing to find herself face to face with a stunned-looking Orlock. Whipping out her power sword, she lunges towards the ganger, who somehow manages to draw a heavy cleaver and fend off her first few strikes. His movement's just enough that even when Lily does land a blow, it fails to bite deeply into her opponent's flesh. In response, the Orlock lashes out with 2 vicious swings of his blade. The first she parries, and the second she goes to sidestep, but just then her foot slips, and Lily suddenly feels the unexpected bite of cold hard steel. Glancing down, she's shocked to see the cleaver's blade embedded deep into her side, and before she can even think to respond, her vision begins to blur and then goes dark, as her legs give way, dropping her limply to the floor. Trying to provide as much cover as possible, Laszlo walks his shot down from the upper platform towards the ESCHER wielding the plasma gun, hoping to cause her to keep her head down even as his rounds deflect harmlessly from the barricade in front of her. Ignoring the hail of bullets around her, Foxglove takes aim at the Orlock Heavy and flicks the switch on her plasma gun to max, waiting the few seconds for the weapon to fully power up before pulling the trigger and sending a burning inferno of energy towards her target. The shot hits the ganger cleanly, but amazingly fails to eat its way through his armour, the bulky Orlock not even flinching as the plasma blast dissipates harmlessly around him. Clambering his way down onto the lower level, Coulson moves into cover and aims his autogun towards one of the 2 ESCHERs camped on the raised walkway on the other side of the river, firing off a burst of rounds that hammer harmlessly into the battered barricade being used by his target for cover. Despite the bullets slamming into the metal in front of her, Holly sights down her lasgun and takes aim at the Orlock ganger currently lying prone in the open. But despite the simplicity of the shot, her lasran flies wide of the mark. With the ESCHER leader out of the fight and the bridge no longer spanning the river, Dylan takes the opportunity to move to the loot casket behind him, working the lock and popping the lid to reveal a handful of credits and other precious items, which he quickly pockets. Following Holly's lead, Mistletoe also targets the prone Orlock, but just like her fellow ganger, her shot fails to land despite the time taken to aim. Flinching away from the las bolts crashing into the ground around him, Hammerstein scrambles to his feet and rushes over to join Coulson behind the protection offered by a large rusted barricade. Wiping the blood from his cleaver, Crow sheathes the weapon and takes a moment to look around and assess the situation. With the bridge turned and the ESCHER leader out, it looked like they'd managed to hold the line, which in the end was all that really mattered. With every member of the Iron Hounds still in the fight, on their feet and ready to push back against the ESCHER, the gang's resolve to continue their defence of the crossing remains unbroken. By contrast, with the bridge currently out of action, their leader down, and only 3 members of the Poisoned Lillies able to fight on, the situation finally becomes too much for the ESCHER to bear, and they are forced to withdraw, taking their wounded and the bodies of the fallen with them. Having watched the few remaining ESCHER turn tail and flee, Crow takes a few moments to check on their own fallen, letting out a sigh of relief to find that, while the boss was going to be pissed, both he and Lando would be fine, though the same couldn't be said for O'Donnell. With the Greenhorn's fate destined to rest in the hands of one of the local rogue dogs, Crow turns his attention towards the young ESCHER they'd managed to capture, as well as the body of their leader, which remained lying in a slick pool of her own blood. While the Juve was bound for the work pit, he knew that leaving the ESCHER leader to bleed out would be bad for business, no matter how much he'd like to simply roll her body into the sump and be done with it. So, with a shake of his head, he calls over Hammerstein, and together they carry her limp form back across the river before dumping her unceremoniously next to a stack of rusted barrels. If the rest of her crew wanted her, they could come and get her, and if not, then that just meant there'd be one less drugged up psycho queen sticking her nose where it didn't belong. Having secured the crossing, the Iron Hounds are able to reflect on another job well done, with Laszlo, Crow and Hammerstein each boosting their experience by taking out a member of the Poisoned Lillies, while both Coulson and Dylan picked up an additional point for inflicting a serious injury and aiding a successful recovery respectively. Of the 3 lasting injuries taken by the Orlocks, only O'Donnell suffered any serious effects, with a dose of ESCHER toxin he received causing a critical injury that needs urgent attention. Meanwhile, Grendel will be left with a fearsome set of horrid scars, while Lander managed to escape with nothing more than superficial burns and a serious headache. As a reward for their victory, the gang earned a total of 160 credits, which includes the 30 that were retrieved from a loot casket by Dylan near the end of the fight. For the Poisoned Lillies, their attempt to capture the bridge has left them far worse off than when they started, despite Foxglove and Narcissus both gaining experience from taking out an Orlock, as did Lily, who also earned an additional 3 points reaching the far side of the river. Unfortunately, the 5 lasting injuries suffered by the gang have resulted in the deaths of both Narcissus and Spindle, as well as the capture of Ivy, meaning that the Poisoned Lillies are down to just 5 fighters with little in the way of resources to replenish their numbers. To add insult to injury, as the losing gang, they fail to earn any credits from the scenario, and are left with just the 30 gained by Mistletoe for opening one of the loot caskets during the course of the battle.